War is one of man's oldest professions. It was a gathering place for camaraderie against a common enemy. The An Tir West War is only that in name. It is not a war for territory. It's a war for glory, and it happens every year around the 4th of July. The SCA stands for the Society for Creative Anachronism, and they are the stewards of this great event. The society is about medieval reenactment, and these wars hope to replicate the wooden sword and whalebone tournaments of the Middle Ages. I made my way out to Ophir, Oregon, in the year of our Lord 2024 to witness the An Tir West War. But enough with the prologue. Let the war begin. When I arrived on that sunny July afternoon, I took stock of the fighters at this great event. Myriad kinds of armor were on display, and their weaponry was equally diverse. Wandering through the many well-crafted pavilions and vendor tents, I found the volunteer booth, where I was directed to a friendly Seneschal from the Principality of the Summits, who could speak to me on the finer points of this war.
So this is An Tir West War. Every year, right around the 4th of July, we get the Kingdom of An Tir, which is Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia, and the Kingdom of the West, which is Northern California, Alaska, and Japan. We will come together and we will have a big, fake war. We get to hang out. We do some melees where we have whole big groups of people fighting each other. We have some tournaments, and just a great way for these two large communities to connect every year and build our relationships. It's been going a couple of decades. I don't know for certain the full length of it. I know it's at least been 20 years. An Tir used to be part of the West until the 80s when it broke off into its own kingdom. So we have 3 combat styles we do. We do rapier fighting, which is with steel swords. It looks a little bit like your Olympic fencing, but they're heavier swords, and we use more historical techniques. We don't fight on a strip. We have our cut and thrust, which is similar. We use steel swords and we're sort of cutting at each other, very swashbuckly, like your pirate movies, things like that. And then our heavy or armored fighting, which we use rattan, which is kind of like a bamboo, and those are simulating being armored up, and so they swing harder as if they're chopping through the armor of their opponent. We have royalty. There's royalty for An Tir. There's royalty for the West. We also have smaller principalities, which are kind of like states inside countries. So we have the Summits, which is Oregon. We have the Mists, and we have Alicia, both in the West. And each of those different groups will choose a set of royals, usually a king and queen, but not always. We have had 2 princes. We've had queens win the tournament, and they choose that through that heavy armored combat tournament. About twice a year we have that. So we're going to have a whole bunch of royals who are going to hold the court and give some awards to our people to recognize them for the awesome stuff they do.
Later in the week, I returned to witness the Squire's Heavy Tournament in Town Square. These weapons were used with great skill, and many of the fighters I had seen previously were in this massive melee. The sounds of war rang out from the town square, and the hot summer sun blazed down onto the combatants. Despite how violent this combat looked from the outside, this was no unruly brawl, but a well-regimented tournament. After I had my fill, I tracked down a local legend amongst the camp, one Duke James Early. His chain was described to be a holy relic amongst the group, and he was at this very event. I found him at his small tent selling books on medieval sciences and culture.
In the society, I'm a duke, which means I've been king at least twice. I'm a knight, which means guys think I'm a pretty good guy and a good fighter, and I behave honorably and do things right. I'm a master of the laurel, which is a knight level award for arts. I made some of the first good armor in the SCA, period looking armor, starting in the 70s. And then I have a Master of the Pelican, which is an award for service, which is earned, that was over some years of doing jobs for the group. So I have what are called peerage level awards in 4 areas. And at this point, mostly what I do is teach. I teach fighting, and I counsel people on what they're doing and how to do it better, whether it's fighting or running a kingdom. When I joined, which was in August, late August of 1968, there were probably only about 200 active people in the Bay Area. And there were, most of the membership was in the Bay Area. Only a few were in LA and New York and the Chicago area. And maybe in the Phoenix, Arizona area. Now there's branches in every state. There's branches in many foreign countries. It's hard to actually estimate the membership because there's paid membership, which it runs around 35 to 40,000 people. But there are a lot of people who play in the SCA. They show up for any number of events. They just don't pay for the membership, and they pay an extra $5 or $10 per event, and the non-member surcharge. And when I joined, going to events was essentially free, because the events were not camp-out events. They were just held in the city park. So they were small. There were no pavilions, real ones. There were a couple of tents that looked like pavilions. Nowadays, there's multiple companies that make medieval pavilions to supply the SCA. Primarily, the SCA is a 501(c) nonprofit corporation that's dedicated to educating people about the Middle Ages through reenactment, through actually making armor, through actually making books, through making parchment, to doing period dances with period instruments so you can figure out what speed they actually had to be played, recreating medieval recipes, which are quite good, by the way. It's not just gnawing on a turkey leg and throwing it over your shoulder or something. They actually had really good table manners. Movies and TVs get that wrong. The SCA also is a way to interact with people who share your interests. A lot of us here share interests in not just the Middle Ages, but in science and in architecture and in pottery, or in ceramics really, or in metalworking of all kinds. But I think the most important thing about the SCA is the connections you make with people around the world. I could go anywhere in the world where there's an SCA group and show up and have people who will help me out, find me a place to stay, help me get established. I've done it. The basis of the society's ethics is just the idea of honor and chivalry and treating people with respect, treating them with dignity, and expecting that treatment in return. And by and large, that's what happens. There are people who have taken advantage of that. The society is a corporation. It has a board of directors. The political structure of the groups is kingdoms, principalities, baronies, shires, and there's always a chief administrative officer at each level in the group. Legally, there's a board of directors. But in most kingdoms, the person that commands the most respect, or persons, are the king and queen. And you get to be king by winning a tournament. So you might think, well, just somebody who's good at sports or something will do that. Well, you had to train for a long time. You had to be dedicated. And you had to learn how to accept blows and how to hit, but not hit too hard. I think it really transforms somebody's character. And so I don't mind that the fighters are, become king and queen. It seems to work. And it's a fair system. We've had women win tournaments and be queen regnant. And a woman fighter beat all the guys. Just last year, I think it was last year, in the finals of a tournament, a husband and wife met each other in the finals. She won the first fight, he won the next two.
We talked for quite some time, much of which I could not fit into this video. A link is in the description for the full uncut interview if you want to hear more about what's changed since the SCA started and other historical anecdotes. I concluded my day by watching my first royal court. At this court, a group known as the Black Company were being honored for great service to the kingdom of An Tir.
Black Company, sound off. Black Company! Black Company! Black Company! Lash, that is a drop in the ocean.
Many hip-hip huzzahs were had, and my gracious porter, as he described himself, was honored by a prince of the kingdom of Rain with a minted coin. What I learned about the SCA is that it is not live-action role-playing, but reenactment of a medieval lifestyle and medieval honor society, minus the whole discrimination aspect. If you or someone you know is interested in medieval history and the weapons that go along with it, visit sca.org to find your local branch. For Redwood Voice, I'm Sebastian Monroe.